Cost-cutters in the US have exposed a massive Orwellian Ministry of Truth, which has been flooding the world with a pro-Western narrative for years, making use of more than 10,000 journalists. The Orwellian Network is made up of USAID, plus a shadowy group called Internews, plus the infamous NED, and more than 1,000 other allegedly independent media groups. This network tightly controls a global narrative worldwide. A key aim is to manipulate Washington-favoured leaders into power in sovereign nations across the planet. Wikileaks revealed last week that a group called Internews Network had a $472 million budget to quietly work with 4,291 media outlets and more than 9,000 individual journalists around the world. Internews was financed through USAID, which itself admits it discreetly financed 6,200 journalists, 707 non-state media outlets, and 279 media-focused NGOs around the world. It had an astonishing budget of more than $43 billion. Where did these media groups collect their negative news items from? From pro-Western groups worldwide, getting cash from another US government group, the National Endowment for Democracy, CIA front organization, typically splashed out $290 million a year to interfere in the politics of more than 100 countries. Put all these numbers together and we have a massive global network of mind control. And it works. This graph shows the moment they decided to increase their focus on cultivating negativity for the Chinese. This is a big story, but many people have not heard about it at all. Why? Because the biggest disinformation network of all, the multi-billion-dollar Western mainstream media, is running a news blackout on it. The Western media is instead telling its massive audience that USAID was a charity group, and it is choosing not to report any revelations about Internews and the NED. Yet the truth is nevertheless coming out through genuinely independent voices on X.com, YouTube, TikTok, and other social media. The whole Orwellian system has been shaken up by a confluence of factors. The first and most immediate being a massive cost-cutting exercise by new US President Donald Trump and his buddy Elon Musk. Professional demonizers are having their cash lifelines pulled, and they are outing themselves by their panicked calls for readers' donations. The second factor is the gradual but large-scale loss of faith in old media and the rise of genuinely independent voices. Here are 10 things the mainstream media is hiding, but the world needs to know. Number 1, the Orwellian news control system spanned the world and often targeted poorer countries that the US wanted to overturn, control, or weaponize against adversaries. So, for example, 60% of media in Belarus and 90% of media in Ukraine were Washington financed. Number 2, Wikileaks shared some interesting information about the people behind Internews. Internews head Jean Bourgault is secretly married to Ray S. Jennings, a high-profile regime change specialist for USAID. Despite paying herself $451,000, Bourgault told her alma mater that she goes to the office once or twice a month. Nice work if you can get it. Number 3, cost-cutting exercises in Washington have also hit professional xenophobes. Reuters, The Economist and other media have admitted that the cost cuts have stopped the work they're getting from groups which weaponize human rights to demonize China. Although, of course, the Economist and the other mainstream media don't use those words. Instead, they paint these demonizers as the good guys. Number 4, huge amounts of American taxpayer cash was quietly sent to anti-government media in Cuba, for example. Between 1985 and 2013 alone, radio and TV Marti received over $500 million in taxpayer money, Mint Press reported. Let me just remind you that US's own records show that US agents tried to murder Cuba's leader multiple times with all sorts of schemes, including the creation of an exploding cigar. Can't make it up. Number 5, even non-Western heads of state have spoken out against this spin, including El Salvador President Nayib Bukele. Most governments don't want USAID funds flowing into their countries because they understand where much of that money actually ends up, he wrote on X. While marketed as support for development, democracy, human rights. The majority of these funds are funneled into opposition groups, NGOs with political agendas, and destabilizing movements, Bukele said, which is pretty much a perfect description of what US cash was doing in Hong Kong for decades. Number 6, these US-sponsored groups often work subtly by fostering dissatisfaction, Chinese academics said. Many projects of the USAID are aimed at cultivating so-called civil forces or opinion leaders, said Liu Xiang, a political scientist at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. He was quoted in the Global Times. He said, and through these aid recipients, they foster dissatisfaction and division in local societies without making real improvements in local conditions. In other words, they don't do any good for anybody. Number 7, America's new leaders are not ashamed to tell the truth. My uncle JFK started USAID to help poor countries develop, and now we use it to stuff them with totalitarian spyware. This encapsulates what has gone so horribly wrong, said Robert Kennedy. Number 8, interference also took place in Southeast Asian countries, said Tanvi Ratna, a policy researcher based in Washington, D.C. Even in ASEAN nations, USAID's funding of media outlets aligned with Western liberal agendas, fueled tensions and undermined local governance. This wasn't development, it was soft regime change funded by the American taxpayer. While communities abroad were manipulated, Americans at home were betrayed. Sold a narrative of foreign aid while their dollars fueled ideological battles overseas. Number 9, a US critic of government control, Mike Benz, has been highlighting a group called NewsGuard as one of the most dangerous parts of the narrative control program. And NewsGuard was founded by Gordon Krovitz, a co-director of Apple Daily, which is an anti-China newspaper in Hong Kong, closed down by its board. NewsGuard is a fan of the Hong Kong Free Press, which will surprise no one. Number 10. All the Western newspapers I have read are hiding this story, because running a global Orwellian Ministry of Truth doesn't really look good for the West, does it? But removing this network is not a bad thing, even for the West. Tanvi Ratna said, disbanding USAID doesn't mean America is retreating from the world. It means stepping back from failed policies that disrespected other nations' sovereignty and focusing instead on genuine partnerships. I think stepping away from disrespecting other nations' sovereignty is clearly a necessary thing. But as for people like Donald Trump creating genuine partnerships, well, I'm going to wait and see on that one. Overall, this is good news, but let's not celebrate too soon and too wildly. It would be unwise to think that a new era of truth-telling about the world is dawning. All international mainstream media outlets are owned and run by the 13% of the world, which is the West. They may have lost a key source of negative news, but they're still out and running as fast as ever. And other organisations pushing the US narrative, from PBS to VOA to the Radio Free Asia cluster, they're all still being financed for now. The US AGM Group, for example, has an annual budget of $950 million US. So for now, we still need to retain a healthy bit of skepticism whenever we read negative stories about the places on the US adversaries list. That includes mainland China, Hong Kong, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and so on. Most importantly, whatever the media tells you, think for yourself. That's the only way we're going to find truth. Peace.